think it's easy to forget just how urgent the rush towards 3D video games was in the mid-1990s. So regardless of which console you sat on, the 2D platforming genre had arguably peaked, with landmark releases such as Super Mario World, Mega Man X, Super Metroid, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Donkey Kong Country. All those games landed in quick succession between 1991 and 1994. Those games, those years, were a golden period for sprite-based gaming, and they launched franchises that would define and represent the decade before it was even half complete. But then, in 1995, something changed. The launch of the 5th generation of video game consoles fundamentally changed the game. The last 2 generations have been dominated by the Sega and Nintendo rivalry, but Sega really fumbled the ball, surprise launching the Sega Saturn worldwide in 1995 to a tepid response. Over the next 2 years, the Sony PlayStation and the Nintendo 64 arrived, bringing a new wave of games using polygonal graphics, and largely moving towards abandoning sprite-based architectures for full, three-dimensional, immersive experiences. But I will always argue that this generation was graphically worse than the previous, that there is a timeless quality to the SNES and the Mega Drive games that hold their charm, while some monstrosities on the PlayStation in particular are best forgotten. Yet the trend was inexorably moving towards the third dimension. It was inevitable. And one of the rising new genres in this world was the 3D Collect-A-Thon. Championed by landmark games such as Super Mario 64, it would go on to inspire games such as Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64, Croc, Spyro the Dragon, Jak and Daxter, and all the way through to Hat in Time, Yooka-Laylee, and even Super Mario Odyssey, all attempts to hark back to this original, this late 90s sudden rush. This simple concept makes the most of complex 3D worlds by challenging the player to explore them and collect items scattered across a map. Because though we now have decades of examples and plenty of learned knowledge about common pitfalls and best practices, designing 3D worlds is hard. It takes a lot longer to construct a three-dimensional environment that is both believable, fun to traverse, and aesthetically pleasing. Because the only alternative to a game designed feasible in a 3D environment would be to constrict the player into a narrow tunnel with almost no freedom of movement. Game designers hit upon this idea of constructing small sandbox worlds, not necessarily large in scope, but detailed in nature. And although the game world was small, they would challenge the players to find items scattered around this sandbox. The treasure hunt aspect would artificially lengthen playtime and increase replayability, providing hours of extra content without the need for designing whole new environments. I mean, I sound cynical, but there is a reason so many next generation games on new consoles feel short in length, because so much development time needs to be spent on building new engines to run the thing. But within 6 months of Mario 64's release, before any other copycat could ape the plumber and his new treasure hunting ways, Sonic was already there with a 3D Collect-A-Thon of his own. And in fact, Sonic Team had come up with the concept long before laying eyes on Mario 64, all the way back whilst working on Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but they'd been too busy working on Nights into Dreams, so they asked technical wizards Traveller's Tales to take over the project for them. And so it came to pass that a full 2 years after the Sony PlayStation entered the market in Japan, Sega published a game for the Mega Drive that dragged their mascot into the third dimension kicking and screaming. The little console that could had one last shot at glory. And although there are examples of 3D shooters on the Mega Drive, the console was not designed with polygonal graphics in mind. Instead, Traveller's Tales created an isometric game with a fixed camera angle, taking inspiration from Donkey Kong Country and pre-rendering all their graphics and converting them into sprites. What they created was a game where you can run in any direction but also jump, artificially adding the illusion of true 3D gameplay. This game pushes the console as far as it could possibly go, and potentially beyond. Traveller's Tales built a brand new code just to render an animated 3D movie in the introduction, just because they could. It's a graphical showcase with some charming features, and it's chock full of well-designed content. But if you want to know the moment that the Hedgehog's charm was tarnished, that the seed of doubt about Sonic's future was sown, it was here. Yes, there were iffy Sonic games before this, largely on handheld Game Gear or the old generation ports, but this was the first Sonic game on a home console that stepped away from the tried and true formula. The concept may have been sound, but when competing with this, the game was always doomed to fail. The world was demanding true 3D gaming, and though the technical marvel on display here was fantastic, Sonic had resolutely refused to step up and embrace the next console generation. However, judged on its own merit, I do think there's something very interesting going on here. The game has one fundamental problem, and something the designers should have seen coming. Hampered by a fast production time of only 8 months, it isn't surprising that this wasn't solved, as it's so core to the Sonic brand. In fact, the very same concept that gave Sonic life would ultimately sow his downfall. I am of course talking about momentum. Sonic is famous for his speed and momentum, so when traversing around the isometric environment, it's incredibly easy to misjudge attacks. This does not mesh well with the need for pixel perfect direction, meaning the game has both an incredibly steep learning curve to control generally, and regular moments of just pure frustration when it tries to involve complex platforming. What works so well in a two-dimensional plane becomes deeply frustrating in 3D. Just the slightest twitch of the controller can send Sonic screeching off in the wrong direction, flinging you off the edge of a platform or into a stage hazard. And that is another thing that has changed. The enemies you fight are rarely a threat in this game. With no artificial intelligence, just some pre-programmed routines, badniks can be seen bumbling around the stages minding their own business. The levels are divided into small arenas, and each will have 5 robots for you to smash, rescue the flickies inside, and escort to the end of the area to progress. The best stages become complex, interconnected mazes, with you having to think laterally about what's going on in 3 dimensions to understand. This is a 3D Collect-A-Thon in every sense. For the first time, rather than just controlling Sonic to progress to the end of the level, you are hunting a hidden treasure. Flickies are your main target. There are a set number per area, and you have to escort them to the gold rings. If you're hit whilst carrying them, they escape and you have to hunt them down again, and depending on the bird's colour, they move in set movement patterns of increasing difficulty. There is also a hunt for rings, not just for survival this time, but to trade to Tails and Knuckles for a chance to get one of the 7 Chaos Emeralds and unlock the final boss. 3D environments, main target collectible to proceed, hidden collectibles for a secret ending, check, check, check. However, Sonic's speed makes the Collect-A-Thon process irritating. The game prevents you from enjoying the movement speed because it cramps you into tight, narrow corridors full of environmental traps. The game forces you to move slowly and take your time, hunting for robots to collect flickies, but that is at odds with the core concept of Sonic. It's not that you can't go fast, it's that if you do, the game will punish you for it. There has been a primitive isometric Sonic game before which had tried this, and that had been a struggle because it forced you to go slowly as part of the game design. So was the learning from that train wreck that Sonic doesn't work isometrically, or that Sonic needs to go fast? If you can get over the ridiculous initial learning curve and handle the finicky controls, there's a lot to love here. Take on its own merits, this game is a visual feast for the times. The soundtracks, both versions of it, are delights, and the game is perfectly on check brand-wise. However, it was ultimately a blind alley, and consumers were not fooled. They wanted 3-dimensional games, and they would only buy true 3-dimensional games, no matter how ugly they were. The game received a light touch-up for the Sega Saturn, and that was nowhere near enough to save that console. On its own merits, this is a game that fails because Sonic's own momentum is at odds with the game design. In context, it's a game that fails because it came out 2 years too late. I'd say conceptually, Traveller's Tales produced a fantastic Mega Drive game, but a very, very poor game for 1996. And no Sonic the Hedgehog fan was really ready for a 3D Collect-A-Thon. And thus, the first chink in the electric hedgehog's armour was exposed.